Now, as I neared Damascus on my journey, suddenly about noon a brilliant light from heaven flashed round me. I dropped to the earth and heard a voice saying to me, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' 'Who are you?' I asked. He said to me, 'I am Jesus the Nazarene, whom you are persecuting.' I said, 'What shall I do, Lord?' And the Lord said to me, 'Rise up and go into Damascus. There you shall be told about all that you are destined to do.' As I could not see, owing to the dazzling glare of that light, my companions took my hand, and so I reached Damascus. Then a certain Ananias, a devout man in the law, who had a good reputation among all the Jews there, came to me and standing beside me said, 'Saul, my brother, regain your sight.'" The crowd of Jews with uplifted faces listened in silence to the wonderful story. Paul went on. "The same moment I regained my sight and looked up at Ananias. Then he said, 'The God of our fathers has appointed you to know his will, to see the Just One, and to hear him speak with his own lips. For you are to be a witness for him before all men, a witness of what you have seen and heard. And now, why do you wait? Get up and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name.' When I returned to Jerusalem, it happened that while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him saying to me, 'Make haste, leave Jerusalem quickly, for they will not accept your evidence about me.' 'But Lord,' I said, 'they surely know that it was I who imprisoned and flogged those who believed in you throughout the synagogues, and that I stood and approved when the blood of your martyr Stephen was being shed, taking charge of the clothes of his murderers.' But he said to me, 'Go, I will send you afar to the nations.'" At that word the silence broke into a thunder of rage. That was the root of all Paul's offence, that he had gone with his message to the nations beyond. And now he dared to blaspheme by saying that God, the God whose chosen people the Jews were, had told him to do so, and had told him in the holy temple. "Away with such a creature from the earth!" they yelled. "He is not fit to live!" They tore off their clothes in a frenzy of angry grief, and like mourners grabbed the dust of the roadway and flung it into the air. Lysias was mystified. What made the Jews foam with such hysterical rage? They were too wild to tell him intelligibly. Paul must. "Take him into the barracks," said Lysias to his officers. "Examine him under the lash and report." They saluted and marched Paul away. They took him to the thrashing post and strapped him to it, so that he might not struggle. When he was thrashed and his spirit cowed, they would make him confess his crimes. Paul spoke to the officer who was standing by giving orders. "Are you allowed to scourge a Roman citizen?" he asked, "and to scourge him without trial?" The officer was aghast. Lysias, he knew, would be degraded from his rank, and severely punished if he beat a Roman citizen and word of it reached Rome. It was bad enough even to have bound him. He hurried to Lysias and said to him, "What are you going to do? This man is a Roman citizen." Lysias rose at once and went out to where Paul stood strapped to the post. "Tell me," he said, "are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes," replied Paul. "I had to pay a large sum of money to buy my citizenship," said the wondering commander. "But I was born a citizen," replied Paul with pride. He was loosed from his bonds at once and led away. In that hour the three threads of Paul's life — the Jewish, Greek, and Roman — had all stood him in good stead: the Greek when he spoke to Lysias, the Jewish when he quelled the uproar, the Roman when he was bound. Paul lay down to sleep that night a prisoner, yet freer than all the hide-bound fanatics who had tried to take his life. But Lysias was still puzzled as to what Paul had done to infuriate the Jews. The next morning, therefore, he sent an order down to the temple that the high priests and the Sanhedrin, the highest authority in the Jewish world, should come and meet with Paul. Lysias, when the Sanhedrin had come together, brought Paul down and placed him in front of them. Paul looked at them with a steady gaze, entirely fearless of their anger. "Brothers," he said, "I have lived with a perfectly good conscience before God down to this present day." It was too much. Ananias, the high priest, purple with rage, shouted to those near Paul. "Smite him!" he cried. "Strike him on the mouth!" Paul lost his temper, and swinging round toward the white-robed Ananias he burst out, "You whitewashed wall, God will strike you! You sit there to judge me by the law, do you? And you break the law by ordering me to be struck." "What?" said some of the bystanders to Paul. "Would you rail at God's high priest?" "Brothers," said Paul, "I did not know that he was high priest." At this point Paul, realizing that the Sanhedrin was made up as to one half of Sadducees who did not believe in the resurrection of man, and as to the other of Pharisees who did believe in the resurrection, shouted to them, "I am a Pharisee, brothers, the son of Pharisees. It is for the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." At once a quarrel broke out. Lysias could make no sense of all this wrangling and clamour, the Sadducees urging Paul's death, the Pharisees forgetting in their defence of their own teaching their hatred of Paul. Scribes of the Pharisees rose up, and the court listened. "We find nothing wrong about this man," said the Pharisaic scribes. "What if some spirit or angel has spoken to him?" The uproar redoubled. The Sadducees stood and shouted and pressed toward Paul as though to tear him to pieces. Lysias ordered the troops to be brought from the citadel, and they formed a bodyguard to protect Paul. The soldiers took him, driving the maddened Jews back, and led him into the barracks. But Lysias was no wiser as to the cause of all the uproar. Paul, as he lay that night with all the future black before him, was conscious of the real presence of his Lord by him. "Courage," said the Presence, "as you have testified to me at Jerusalem, so you must do at Rome." The Jews who saw their archenemy Paul snatched from under their very hand by the Roman power were determined that, even now, he should not escape. Between 40 and 50 of them came together at dawn on the next day in secret. They formed a plot for an ambuscade. Standing together, they took a most solemn oath that they would not taste food till they had killed Paul. They went, then, down to the temple, and gained audience with the high priests and elders. "We have," they said, "taken a solemn oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now, you and the Sanhedrin must let the commander know that you propose to investigate this case in detail, so that he may have Paul brought down to you. We will be all ready and will kill him on the way down." A young man overheard men talking about the plot. He was Paul's nephew. He hurried up to the citadel, got entrance to the barracks, and was allowed to see Paul, to whom he told the whole story. Paul called to one of the officers. "Take this young man," he said, "to the commander, for he has some news to give him." So the officer led Paul's nephew to Lysias. "The prisoner Paul," he said, "has summoned me to ask if I would bring this young man to you, as he has something to tell you." The commander took Paul's nephew by the hand and led him aside and asked him in private, "What is the news you have for me?" "The Jews have agreed," he answered, "to ask you to bring Paul down tomorrow to the Sanhedrin, on the plea that they propose to examine his case in detail. Now, do not let them persuade you. More than 40 of them are lying in ambush for him, and they have taken a solemn oath neither to eat nor to drink till they have murdered him. They are already at this moment awaiting your consent." Lysias paused to think, then he dismissed the youth. His mind was swiftly made up. He knew the anger of Rome if a Roman citizen, even a prisoner, suffered death by murder when in the charge of a Roman official. "Tell nobody," he said, "that you have informed me of this." As Paul's nephew went out, Lysias called to 2 officers, who stood before him awaiting orders. "Get ready by 8 o'clock tonight 200 infantry, with rations, to march as far as Caesarea. Also 70 troopers and 200 spearmen." End of chapter 29.